and get started. We're at the top of the hour. So my name is Leacey Brown. I'm a gerontologist with South Dakota State University Extension, and my role is to bring evidence-based information to the citizens of South Dakota to help them as they're making decisions and planning for the future. So a few housekeeping items to begin with. Our evaluation will come out in a follow-up email. We'd greatly appreciate your feedback on this webinar to help us as we plan for future webinars. We ask that you hold your questions until the end of the webinar, and we'll leave some time there at the end to discuss your questions. And I sent you the slides and the manuscript that was written about the project that we're going to talk about today. That's all in an email that came to you this morning. So the purpose of this webinar is to increase your knowledge about technology adoption. This webinar will also talk about an intergenerational technology program developed by SDSU Extension. And these lovely young people on the screen were some of my early participants, so I have to give a shout out to them for helping me with this project. So what are the benefits of technology use? Technology gives us the opportunity to connect with other people. Technology can also help us access more services and information. And I feel this image up on the screen is super important. It says all this technology is making us antisocial. And I hear that quite a bit, when we talk about technology. And really, technology is a reflection of us. Newspaper doesn't seem high tech, but back in this time, being able to mass produce newspapers so everybody could have their own newspaper was a pretty big deal. So I'd like you to take a moment and read this question on the screen and write in the chat box whether or not this is a true or false statement. Non-users are more likely to be 65, lower income, lower educational attainment, and living in rural areas. Is this statement true or false? A lot of truths and some falses. It is a true statement, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. A profile of our older technology users. Our older technology users are typically younger, so that means they're closer to age 65. They typically have a higher income. In fact, 87% of older adults living in households with an earnings of $75,000 or greater have access to the internet. They're using the internet. And people with that are more highly educated of older adults tend to use technology. They're more likely to say that they need help using new electronic devices. So I want to give you a couple other just figures to show the diversity within our older adults. When we're talking about somebody who's age 65 to 69, 82% report that they go online. Compared to those age 80 and older, 44% say they go online. So even among those that go online less, there's still a lot of use. So moving on to our next slide. Disability status and technology use. People with disabilities are about 3 times less likely than those with disabilities to say they never go online. 20 points less likely to say they subscribe to home broadband and own a traditional computer, a smartphone, or a laptop. Some of this may be related to income and usability. In general, people who have disabilities have a lower income than those without disabilities. Specialized technology solutions tend to be really expensive. I met a woman a few years ago. Her daughter was injured in a terrible ski accident when she was a small child. And she has a pretty significant cognitive impairment that happened as a result of this accident. And so she needs help planning her daily activities of living. the specialized software that prompted her to do these different activities. So for example, she has a service dog. The software would prompt her to let the service dog outside, was around $4,000. Her mom ended up doing some research and found that she could use an iPad and a couple apps and do the same thing for a quarter of the cost. So that specialized technology tends to be pretty expensive. And when we have folks that are living on a fixed income, they can't necessarily afford to purchase that specialized technology. Another reason is mainstream technology usability is often neglected when developing mainstream technology. So usability refers to how difficult is it for a person to learn how to use a device and then remember how to use that device upon subsequent uses. Unfortunately, most technology does not do the usability assessments, and if they do, they may not include people with disabilities that interact with technology a little bit more differently. I want to kind of stress, just because a person has a disability doesn't mean they need specialized technology. We just need the existing technology to be designed in a way that a person with a disability could use it. So why don't non-users use technology? And it's about 10% of the population nationally does not use technology. So why aren't they using it? It's not relevant to them. They don't see how it can help them in their lives at all. It's difficult to use. So this goes back to that usability piece. And one of my favorite examples to show people is with my iPhone. I have an iPhone for my cell phone. And on the calculator, I know Androids are different, but on the calculator on my iPhone, there is not a back delete button. If you want to delete a single digit, you have to swipe your finger. So unless someone shows you that, most people aren't going to know that a simple swipe is going to delete that number. So that's that usability. It's difficult to use. Technology and internet connection can be quite costly. So some folks who are living on a more fixed income can't afford it, which is probably why we see that adults with higher incomes are using technology at high rates. There's also this physical lack of availability or access. In some places, technology simply is not available. Broadband connection is not available. You know, I live here in South Dakota. There's even areas where the cell phone reception is just not there. So it's just that lack of access to technology. So 34% say it's not relevant to them. 32% say it's difficult to use. 19% say it's the cost of the services, and 7% don't have access. And 92% of non-users said they were not interested in using the internet or email. So it's really interesting, you know, when we have those groups. So now that we better understand individual characteristics that impact technology adoption, let's unpack other factors that impact technology use among older adults. So it's that rate of innovation. Rate of innovation refers to how fast is technology changing. And I think most of us know that technology moves exceptionally fast. And why this can be problematic when we're trying to do research about quality of life interventions that utilize technology, by the time these randomized trials are completed, the technology solution that was being tested was out of date. You know, so if researchers can't keep up with technology as they're trying to understand what would be a good quality of life intervention, then what about people who do not use technology trying to learn a new skill when the technology is just changing so rapidly? So that makes it really difficult to adopt technology, and it makes it frustrating for our new users. So usability, I can't stress this enough. The way that we design our technology plays an important role in whether or not people will use it. If it's easy to use, if it's fun to use, if people can remember how to use it, they're more likely to use it. But if it's frustrating, you can't figure out how to do the things that you just did, people are not going to use it. So here's a great example kind of to illustrate that usability piece. So I had an automatic pet feeder for my cats. You know, I needed it because I was traveling out of town. And to set the portion size, I had to press 2 buttons on the contraption at the same time. And then I could get into the programming menu. But if I press the wrong two buttons, the hopper would just start dropping food. And I struggled every time I messed with that thing to figure out how to turn that hopper off. So that's that usability. Can I remember how to use it? If I can't remember how to use it, it's poorly designed. So gerontological literacy, that is literally what do people know about aging in older adults? And that topic is severely neglected in our school system. Most people enter later stages of life never having learned anything about the process of aging and what to expect. And this is closely linked to the final thing that impacts technology adoption among older adults, and that's that subjective aging. How does that person think about their own aging process and their ability to learn new skills? So there is this common idea that our ability to learn, there's this idea that our ability to learn as we get older goes down. And that's a stereotype that doesn't really have truth to it. How we learn may change, but it doesn't prevent us from learning new skills. It may take longer, but we can still learn. Angela, I see your question. I'll be sure to get to it to the end. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the TeachSD program. So this is a dual purpose program that's meant to serve the younger participants and the older participants. Kind of the objectives of this program are to increase our confidence among older adults to use technology. We want to increase gerontological literacy among younger people, and we want to enhance the technology teaching skills in our younger participants. Why we felt that teaching the young people was important. As I kind of shared earlier, most people don't have training about aging. They don't have knowledge about aging that reflects what we know from scientific research. Unfortunately, a lot of people believe stereotypes, that older adults are cognitively impaired, they're unable to learn, they're cranky, there's a whole host of stereotypes, and we know that the research indicates these stereotypes aren't true. So we felt that younger people needed to be taught about aging so that they understood what the process of aging is and how that may affect ability to learn and master technology skills. So the intervention we developed included education, it included experiential learning, and then positive exposure. So this experiential learning we developed. On this picture on the screen, you see one of our volunteers is wearing headphones, cataract simulators, cotton gloves with their fingers taped together. And this person is taking a picture with an iPad. And while disability is not necessarily going to be present in all of our older adults who are participating in our program, we wanted them to understand how disabilities might affect a person's ability to learn technology. So the gloves, it makes the screen harder to use. The cataract simulators makes it harder to see the screen. And the idea is that if our younger participants have this sensation of what is it like trying to learn and use technology when your senses are not quite as sharp, we felt that that would make them better teachers and make them more empathetic. And hopefully the goal was that instead of, blaming something on the person's age, oh, they're old, that's why they can't use the touchscreen, maybe they figure out an intervention, a strategy. So for example, one of our older clients, she was struggling with the touchscreen. She had really long fingernails and she just could not manage to strike the buttons on the screen in the appropriate location. So we gave her a stylus and she took the stylus and was able to use her iPhone with the stylus. So the idea is if we teach kids, about aging, about disability and how it affects learning, then they would be better able to identify the source of the barrier to the adult that's learning, if that makes sense. So once our volunteers went through this training, then we worked with community partner sites. So we had a senior center, we had a library, we had actually an implements dealer. Is interesting enough, one of our really small rural towns, they had the lessons at the implement dealer, which I thought was really fun. So, all right. So before we actually developed all of that, so it's a little out of order, but that's all right. Before we actually developed ours, and then why we developed ours the way that we did, first and foremost, we did not want to focus on technology. We wanted to focus on the skills that a person would need to teach technology skills. So we reviewed existing intergenerational technology program. Only 43% of them had the skills or knowledge about technology being the actual goal. Other programs, they wanted to reduce isolation. They wanted to promote mental acuity and self-esteem. They wanted to provide work skills. And they wanted other activities were fitness and physical activity, you know, so. And only one of the programs addressed ageism. That one was a undergraduate service learning course that included readings, hands-on experiences, blogs, reflection assignments, team projects, sensitivity training, role-playing, and field work. So we ended up developing our model to account for the factors that we identified as being most important to our students. So development of the program. Excuse me, I flipped forward on a slide. There's my slide. I emphasized that these were self-directed lessons. We really wanted to give our older adult participants control. One thing we found is, you know, emphasizing a specific skill, maybe use the internet. That may not be what the older adult wants. You know, for example, one of our older adults, all she wanted to know how to do was learn to use her cell phone to send text messages to her grandchildren. And it was powerful for her because now she has, you know, she gets to communicate with her children, her grandchildren, using her cell phone. So she didn't care about using the internet. She didn't care about social media. All she cared about was sending text messages. So that's why we focused on a program that emphasized technology teaching skills. Another reason we did not focus on specific pieces of technology is because technology goes out of date. It is changing so rapidly. So by the time you create any curriculum that is focused on a specific piece of technology, it will be out of date. So our emphasis was, how do you teach these skills? How do you break it down? How do you explain these concepts to a person who doesn't understand? So for example, when you're thinking of the internet and what the internet is, how do you teach somebody who's never used it? How do you explain this really abstract concept? You know, so for an example may be, you compare it to a map, or a library, or an encyclopedia. And then you compare the web address to the street address, or the Dewey Decimal System, whatever, to help that adult get a cognitive image in their head of what we're trying to teach them. So the pilot period took place over 18 months. We worked with youth programs, we worked with adult programs, and we piloted and we refined this model. We received grant support from Grantmakers in Aging, and this allowed us to hire an independent evaluator, which highly recommend. We refined our evaluation plan, our logic model, and we just set some indicators so that we could really monitor this project and learn from this project. Well, spring of 2016 arrives, and we're not meeting those goals that we set for ourselves. So we stopped to do our process evaluation. And what we found is that our volunteers didn't have a clear understanding of their role. So this includes the adult volunteers that are supervising the youth, the adult volunteers that are coordinating the lessons at our partner locations like a senior center or a library. We received feedback that the volunteer training was poorly understood and viewed as too long. So for example, one person asked, why was I teaching kids technology? And it wasn't clear that we were actually teaching kids how to teach technology skills. So that was a really important lesson for us. Perhaps the most important lesson was our most successful sites flourished when the community members prompted that program in their community. You know, I spent a lot of time recruiting partners where when partners came to me and said, yes, we want this program in our community, those communities were more successful. So how do we fix it? How do we get our project back on track? We created expectations for every person involved, so it was clear to everybody what my role was and what their role was. We shortened our volunteer training. It was about a half day, and we shortened it to 2.5 hours. And then we rebranded it as an orientation. And then the remainder of our pilot, we really focused on those communities that were going to operate these technology training programs independently so that I could focus on meeting the expectations in the grant and capturing all the lessons that we learned. So lesson learned from our pilot project, because this was a really awesome pilot project. That subjective aging intervention that I developed, where we teach kids about aging, we teach kids about older adults, we teach kids about what it's like to learn new skills when a person has a disability. That is what made our approach unique. Our emphasis on teaching skills, how do you teach these skills? That's what made our approach unique, you know. So we would have been well served instead of trying to launch intergenerational technology programs across the state of South Dakota, we would have been really well served to find those communities that are already leading intergenerational technology programs and ask to pilot our training approach. And let's see, does our way of training improve the outcomes for participants, the younger participants and the older participants? The second one is closely linked to the first. The education outreach has to be manageable within our given resources. You know, so I'm the lone gerontologist in South Dakota, and trying to run intergenerational technology programs across the state of South Dakota just wasn't practical. It wasn't feasible. So those two lessons are exceptionally important, and I was grateful to have them. I would like to have been more successful. Not that I was unsuccessful. We had a lot of participation. We had a lot of positive feedback, but I didn't reach the goals that I set for myself. So let's talk about the TeachSD toolkit. The TeachSD toolkit is what we ended up developing, and it is available to anybody who would like it. So it has the volunteer orientation that includes 3 videos. That was one of the changes we made, is we created 3 short videos that provide some of the educational content that we created to teach the younger people about teaching technology skills. We also developed sensitivity training that anybody could take and do. We had stations, so I'll tell you a little bit about the sensitivity training. So there were 8 stations, and they involved people doing different activities. So one activity you saw on the screen earlier was taking a picture. Another activity might be sending a text message. Other activities, we had them look at an eye chart from across a room. We had them look up a restaurant using their cell phone. So just different activities so that they could interact with the technology while wearing the cataract simulators, noise canceling headphones, the gloves, and then the tape on the fingers. The orientation guide includes instructions on how to set up that training, where to get the materials and the supplies. Folks that are in South Dakota can check out the toolkits from me that include everything in there, but others who are interested in this training, that orientation guide includes all the information about how to set up that training for the young people. There's also an implementation guide that really captures the lessons that we learned as we were developing this projects. So it's got, for example, technology use rules. It's got a little evaluation tools. It's got expectations. It's got just a bunch of different pieces that are helpful for when developing these intergenerational technology program. And I am delighted to report that the materials that SDSU Extension developed have been incorporated in the Microsoft and the 4-H Tech Changers partnership. The URL on the screen will take you there so you can learn more. I did see that Gail mentioned that they used the activities at the regional 4-H Tech Changemaker training. So I'm delighted to hear that some of the stuff that we have put together is being used, because we feel that this is a very powerful way to go about technology teaching. In many ways, when I talk to people about technology and trying to help them understand what is it like to learn these skills, it's honestly like learning a foreign language. There is a vocabulary, emoticon. I mean, one of the best activities that I think we came up with for the younger people to try to help them understand is we have them brainstorm just all the technology terms that they could think of. And then they had to look at the terms and figure out which ones, mean something else. So for example, a notebook. It's a laptop computer, but it's also literally a notebook that you write in. So I'm excited that this has emerged, and I look forward to seeing how it continues to move forward and the positive impact that it has on those younger and older participants in there. Well, I have gone through this pretty quickly. So those questions, Chelsea, will you tell me which questions?
All right, yes, I'm unmuting myself now. So the first question was from Angela. Any idea how many people avoid technology due to security and privacy concerns, and is this an issue?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would have to do some research to get that. It seems like I've read it before, but I didn't think to pull that. So I will look that up for you.
Yeah, and I would just say that from doing presentations out in the community myself, I hear that a lot from participants, but I do not have any kind of statistics myself either. So, but I would say more actually using them than not, but it is still definitely always a concern.
Definitely.
And then, yeah, as you mentioned, Gail said she's utilized the activities at 4-H Tech Changemakers training. They were highly impactful with the participants. Brent commented that he once had a professor say technology and in parens, computers are like books. We open one page at a time. And I commented it's so true.
That's very true. Yep.
Gail said she was one of the presenters with Kenny, that it's great stuff that we're adapting and utilizing in Wisconsin.
Awesome, Gail. That's cool. I knew Kitty was working through the process, and I appreciate you both utilizing these materials.
And then Barb asked, have we looked at the Gray for a Day program for activities? Barb, we are very familiar. We work with Erin Yellen, so we are very familiar with the Gray for a Day. But Leacey, I'll let you answer the question.
Definitely. I did not look at the Gray for the Day when I was developing the materials. I was familiar with activities, going through graduate school. We've heard about the activities where you put corn in shoes and have people walk around. And I focused on the senses that are most important when trying to utilize technology: sight, vision, and touch. Those are the ones I focused on, and hearing, because you have to be able, especially if someone's teaching you, you have to be able to hear. So we did not look at Gray for a Day, and heck, Gray for a Day and this program may have been in development at around the same time.
And I just have to give a shout out to my colleague, Molly Hofer, who was, she developed Walk in My Shoes, which is a 4-H program 20 years ago when she started in Extension. And so for anybody who's ever used Walk in My Shoes with 4-H, which is the same gist as Gray for a Day and all the sensory programs like this, she was a trailblazer 20 years ago. So So yeah, so.
And Molly's materials I did review.
Yeah.
Whenever I was looking through, I did review about Molly's materials. So.
Yeah, so, but yeah, all good stuff. It's great to have people kind of understand it from a different perspective, because that's the best way to help people learn sometimes.
Well, and I love these sensory activities. They're exceptionally important, but we have to balance when we're using these activities to make sure we're not reinforcing stereotypes about aging.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've heard younger participants make comments like, "Oh, I don't want to get old." You know, and that's not the point of the lesson.
Right.
You know, because not everybody, you know, develops severe hearing loss or severe vision loss. So that these experiential activities are exceptionally important, but there's got to be a lot of reminders that, you know, this is not what everybody is like.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is so you can help those who are experiencing the worst. So really one of the most important things that happens is that discussion after they go through the experiential activities. Because I always kind of have almost a knee-jerk reaction when people say they're going to do programs like Gray for a Day, because there's a fine line of unpacking this so the younger people understand that this is not a universal experience, but some of the folks you will work with may experience these. And we know people with disabilities use technology at lower rates than the general population. So those are more likely going to be the people coming in for help, but not always. Any other questions, comments? And you're welcome to use the microphone. You don't have to type if you don't want to. So in the slides, there's my contact information. Another thing that I have for you that was in those slides, I include the reference list with the data for this. And that data, some of it may talk about security. I'm wondering if that Pew Research talks about security. Pew Research has got some phenomenal data about technology use, and they actually just released a report that breaks up users by generation, because there are some differences. Boomers use technology by and large. Boomers are online. We did not work with occupational therapists for the adaptive equipment. I think it'd be an excellent idea. Really, the idea was to find simple solutions, not just necessarily devices. So the one woman needed the stylus. You know, another solution might be increasing the size of the text on the device they're using. There's also some accessibility settings built right into mini telephones, our technology that can just be turned on. So it was really a matter of teaching the kids how to find them. Caretakers, Brent, could you help me understand what you mean, like family caregivers? That was not really our target audience. Family caregivers were not our target audience. Our target audience was adults that were interested in learning to use technology.
This is Karen in Wisconsin. A question about senior aging, chronologically gifted people. And did you talk about how they might use like a Zoom technology to connect because of the social isolation? Or was it more the nitty-gritty of, you know, sending a text and how to find information?
So we talked to, one of the things we had, one of our volunteers, I had one volunteer do like almost 50 hours of work for me as a volunteer. So one thing we had him do was brainstorm different tasks and then break them into difficulty levels. So we didn't necessarily say, hey, Zoom, you know, here's how to use Zoom. Mm-hmm. The adults, when they came in for lessons, they would bring in what they had a question about, okay, and see if they could get help. And that there is an element of challenge with that, because we did have some adults bring in some older technology and the kids had no clue how to use it. It was like an older Windows program. And so so there is some challenge, but here's an example. So we had one gentleman who had one of those Bluetooth enabled hearing aids, and he wanted to connect his hearing aid to his cell phone so he could listen to audiobooks. So he came in with help to get help with that. Okay. So the lessons were really driven by the adult. And I think that is the key to overcoming that barrier of not seeing it as relevant, is you have to find what they're interested in. That social connection is a good piece, but the adult has to tell us how do they want to communicate. So we had that woman who wanted to use text messages so she could talk to her grandchildren. Mm-hmm. So I think the key is like overcoming that it's not relevant to me. It's giving them the autonomy and choice to pick what they want, because there is so much technology out there, so much. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Well, it's a Friday. Do I get extra credit for being done early?
All right. Thank you, Leacey. Did you want to, I know you said you're going to email the evaluation. Is anybody on here today that did not register? If so, we would need to capture their emails.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciate you coming. I appreciate everyone being here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anne.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Leacey, for a wonderful presentation.
Awesome. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you.